I'm Tricky Pixie with the Windy City Rollers, and welcome to Class 3 of our Roller Derby Rules series. Last time we went over 2.2 positions, and today we'll be going over 2.3 engagement zone and pack. As always, you can follow along in the rulebook at rules.wftda.com. And so jumping right into pack definition. The pack is one of the most important and fundamental rules of roller derby, as the pack defines where most of the action on the track is allowed to happen. The pack is defined as the largest group of blockers, with blockers from both teams, who are in bounds and upright, that are each within 10 feet of another pack skater. You'll notice that jammers are not included within pack definition. The pack only consists of blockers. The third criteria, being within 10 feet, is what the rulebook calls proximity. I have these listed as 3 criteria, but they must be taken together, not individually. And I think the best way to explain is to go through some examples. So an easy example here is that the green square represents the pack. So those 5 blockers, the 4 on blue and 1 on orange, are in the pack. They are the largest group of blockers, and there are blockers from both teams. They are all upright and in bounds, and they're each within 10 feet of another pack skater. The jammers are not included within the pack, and the 3 blockers in front are more than 10 feet away from the pack, so they are not included within the pack either. A couple more things to keep in mind when defining the pack. If a blocker is penalized, even if they're still on the track, they no longer count toward pack definition. And when you're measuring 10-foot distance to the nearest pack skater, this is measured parallel to the inside line and from the skater's hips. So this image here shows that the distance measured is parallel to the inside line. They're not perfect lines that I made, but they are all the same length. So it shows that even if you're on that 10-foot marker, it does not always go 10 feet to the next marker. If you're on the middle, it'll always be 10 feet to the next marker. But if you're on the inside on the turn, it'll go a bit farther. And if you're on the outside, it won't go all the way there. To contrast that with on the straightaway, if you are anywhere along this 10-foot marker here, if a skater is anywhere along the next 10-foot marker, then you are within that 10 feet. I do want to point out that the program does not calculate distances correctly on the turn. This is about as far as it'll let me go on the inside line while remaining in the pack, whereas on the outside, it's similarly about a foot behind this line. But this, you can see, is a much longer distance than back here. So this should let me go further, and up here I should have to be closer to be within 10 feet. So what happens if the pack definition requirements are not met? If they are not, then there is no pack. And so let's go back to nerds.space to go through some more examples of what the pack looks like. So I will keep the jammers off to the side as they do not affect the pack definition at all. So here I have the pack skaters highlighted in green, so you can identify who is in the pack. So right now these 5 blockers are in the pack. This is the largest group of blockers. There's blockers from both teams, and they're all within 10 feet of each other. And so this can be true even if they're more spread out. If they're all within 10 feet of the next one, then they're all within the pack. And these 3, because they're more than 10 feet, are not in the pack. If it's split like this, so it's 4 and 4, or if it's 4 and 4 like this, there's no single largest group of blockers, and so there is no pack in this situation. However, if it were, let's say, 3 and 3, there would be a pack, and it would be up here, because this group has blockers from both teams and this group does not. So that's where you need to look at all 3 requirements. So it has to be the largest group of blockers from both teams, and this is the only group that meets that requirement. So the pack would be here in this case. The pack could be just 2 skaters if all the other skaters are more than 10 feet away, but you'll see that the pack always needs at least 1 blocker from each team. And one more example, in this case, everyone's currently in the pack, but let's say if I double click, it'll put this person as if they were down. So if this person falls down, then these two blockers would no longer be in the pack because you must be upright. And so these two are no longer within 10 feet of another upright pack skater. So hopefully those examples gave some better explanation to what the pack is. I'm going to go over some quiz questions. I just have 5 questions. I'll show an example. I want you to guess where the pack is. You can pause the video if you'd like. I'll give you a few seconds to think, and then I will show the answer. Okay, so in this example, the pack is the 5 skaters in back, similar to the previous one. That's the largest group, blockers from both teams, all within 10 feet. Hopefully pretty easy. As a reminder, those are the 3 requirements, and if they're not met, then there is no pack. Question 2. I'll give you a few seconds. And for this one, it was the 2 blockers in the middle. That's the only group that has blockers from both teams, so that is where the pack is. The other 2 groups are more than 10 feet away, so they are not included within the pack. Question 3, I'll give you a few seconds. This one was the group in back. I tried to throw you off by having the jammers in there, but jammers do not affect the pack at all. So the group in back has the largest number of blockers with blockers from both teams. So that is where the pack is. Question 4. For this one, the pack is all of the blockers. Again, not the jammers, but all of the blockers are within 10 feet of each other, and so they're all included within the pack. And last one, question 5. For this one, if you guessed no pack, then you are correct. There are 2 equally sized groups of blockers, and so there is no single largest group to determine a pack. So now that we've covered the pack, let's move over to the engagement zone. So the engagement zone is 20 feet from the pack in both directions. So you can see the pack skaters here. The engagement zone extends 20 feet from the pack in both directions. The engagement zone is what's considered in play, and so if a blocker is not in the engagement zone, they are out of play. The engagement zone is called the engagement zone because blockers can only engage or be engaged within the engagement zone. You can think of engage as another word for block. Blockers can only block or be blocked within the engagement zone. Jammers are treated differently, so jammers can leave the engagement zone. They don't have to stay there. And jammers can block other jammers anywhere. However, jammers cannot hit blockers who are out of play. That's important because if there's no pack, there's no engagement zone. So if there's no pack, jammers cannot hit blockers, but blockers cannot hit jammers either. So if a blocker is outside the engagement zone, they must return to it. Otherwise, they can get a failure to return penalty. If you are out of play and someone blocks you, you are allowed to legally counterblock for safety, but you cannot initiate further blocks while out of play, or else you could get an illegal contact penalty. Similarly, if you're blocked while out of bounds, so if you're just off the track entirely, you're allowed to absorb that contact to mitigate their hit, but you cannot hit them back or initiate blocks while out of bounds. Otherwise, again, a legal contact penalty. So this brings us to maintaining a pack. All blockers are responsible for maintaining a pack, and it is illegal to intentionally destroy the pack. So if there is no pack, then the blockers, of course, cannot engage or be engaged because there is no engagement zone. And the referees will tell you no pack. They will say the words no pack if there is no pack. However, treat this warning as a courtesy. If you hit someone while there is no pack before the warning, you will still get an illegal contact penalty. So the warning is just to help you reform the pack. It's not a requirement before you can get penalties. So all blockers from both teams must act to reform a pack, but there are different requirements depending on where you are. So the blockers in the front must slow down or stop, and the blockers in back must skate forward. I'm actually going to go to the rulebook because it is a bit nuanced in what the requirements specifically are. So all blockers must form a pack, the blockers in back must go forward, and skaters in front must slow or stop. If an immediate action is not sufficient to reform the pack, additional effort is required. If a blocker is in the rear group, they must accelerate until sprinting towards the front group until a pack is reformed. And only giving some effort is not enough. They must give adequate effort to get there. But if you are going very fast, you are allowed to slow down to stay safe if pack reformation is imminent. If a blocker is in the front group, you must actively brake until you come to a complete stop, and just coasting is insufficient. But you are not required to skate clockwise. So just to summarize that, if there is no pack, you must make safe, immediate, and quick action to reform the pack. If you're in the back, someone needs to quickly run up, and if you're in front, you must slow or stop to allow them to catch up and reform. So showing an example of what that looks like, let's say the yellow jammer is pushing up this purple wall. Once there is no pack, then again those requirements kick in. So someone on the yellow team must skate forward to reform the pack immediately. If they do not, then they can get a failure to reform penalty. And then there's still no pack, someone else needs to run up and reform. So if you're too slow or if no one goes to reform, the referee will call someone. You might be the closest person to the ref, you might be the closest person who's able to reform, or if you're just blocking the jammer and not reforming, they might just call you on a penalty. But they will call someone if the pack is not reformed. Similarly, the blockers in front, they cannot continue blocking the jammer, they must slow or stop. They might even send someone backward, but they don't have to. So their requirement is just to slow or stop to let someone from the yellow team come up and reform. Now going to the casebook, the first one is scenario C23A. If you hit the only opposing blocker out of bounds, this is not a penalty, but you must skate counterclockwise to allow them legal re-entry. So showing what that looks like, if one team only has one blocker on the track, then that blocker is required to form a pack because, again, the pack needs blockers from both teams. So if that one blocker is hit out of bounds, that means there is no pack anymore. So it would seem like there was an intentional action to destroy the pack, but the casebook is saying that no, it is not a penalty, but you must allow that blocker you hit out to re-enter so they can reform the pack. Right now, they cannot re-enter because they were hit out and they cannot enter in front of someone who hit them out. They are not required to skate clockwise, so purple one is required to skate counterclockwise to allow this blocker to re-enter legally and reform the pack. The next one is very similar. If a team only has one blocker left and that blocker attempts a hit and goes out themselves, similarly, that's not a penalty. Yellow 2 tries to get a hit but goes out of bounds. There's no pack, but it won't be called on a penalty. But again, they must re-enter to reform. And the third scenario I want to go over is C421J. So blocking during a no pack while someone attempts but fails to reform is a penalty. So basically what that's saying is if there's a no pack situation, say the yellow jammer pushes this wall forward and there's an attempt to reform, so this blocker maybe skates up a little bit but slowly or they don't get within 10 feet and there's no pack for multiple seconds and these blockers continue to block this jammer that they can't block during a no pack, and so instead of calling this blocker on a failure to reform, one of these blockers will get called on that penalty because they are actively blocking and they are not taking any action to reform. However, it does note that if yellow 1 in this situation does immediately reform, it is okay to continue blocking here. So you can keep blocking if the pack is immediately reformed, but if it is not reformed, then you can't block when there's no pack. So not everyone has to move up or take action to reform, but someone must reform the pack for gameplay to keep going. Alright, so the last rule I want to go over today is about pack speed. And so the rulebook never explicitly defines in the glossary or in the rulebook what pack speed is or what it means, but it does reference it in multiple places. So I'm just going to show you where it's referenced and then draw some conclusions from those. So first in section 2.3, the main section that we're going over, it says when the pack is moving counterclockwise, stopped, or has no established speed, clockwise skating which destroys the pack is illegal. So here it gives us a lot of information. We learn that the packed speed can be going clockwise, counterclockwise, be stopped, or have no established speed. If it's any of those except clockwise, then clockwise skating, which destroys the pack, is illegal. Casebook does give more specifics. So scenario C23B, it says if the red wall is skating forward and the white blockers are standing still, there will be a no pack declared, but no penalty either. So in this case, the important thing to take away is that roller derby is played in the counterclockwise direction, and so clockwise movement is held to a different standard. If the white pivot were to take a knee or skate backward, then that would be a pack destruction penalty. Because again, going back to the rules here, it says that if there is no established speed, clockwise skating, which destroys the pack, is illegal. But counterclockwise skating, when there's no established pack speed, might not be illegal. In this case, they were moving slowly enough to allow the white team to maintain a pack. So if they were moving faster or more suddenly, maybe it would be a penalty. But in this case, they're slowly going forward when white is standing still. There's no established pack speed yet, and so there's no penalty. The last one I want to go over is scenario C421I. And so this one says, immediately after the jam starting whistle, all red blockers are stationary and white blockers skate counterclockwise. And they end up in a no pack situation. So again, it's very similar to the last one. There is no pack, but there is no penalty either. So here it does give us more information. For a penalty to be issued, one team or skater must clearly be at fault for the pack's destruction. And usually this will be the team or skater who changes their speed from the established speed of the pack. So if the pack has an established speed and a team or skater deviates from that, resulting in a no pack, that might be a pack destruction penalty. But they say in this scenario, neither team's speed has changed. Red was standing still and white was going forward when the jam started. So there was no established pack speed. They did not change their speeds. And so no one's clearly at fault and there's no penalty. But they do say again that if white skated clockwise and caused a no pack, this would be a penalty because there is no established pack speed. So again, there's that double standard of movement in clockwise versus counterclockwise direction. The last thing I want to cover today is not a rule, but a piece of strategy. And I think it's important to know as it's very common and common terminology you'll see, which is bridging. So bridging is a strategy where skaters stand 10 feet apart from the pack to extend the engagement zone. So in this situation, if yellow jammer was pushing up the purple wall, again, once there's a no pack, if you don't send anyone clockwise, you're relying on the other team to reform before you're allowed to block the jammer again. And most teams don't want to do that. They want to continue blocking and not risk getting a penalty. As a result, before they get out of play, they will send one skater to bridge. And bridging basically means that they're standing 10 feet within the pack and they're holding the pack. So because they're in the pack, their teammates are allowed to continue blocking. And I'll show the engagement zone here in yellow. The engagement zone being 20 feet from the pack, their team can continue blocking until they're out of play here. Here, they could send another bridge, which would extend the pack, and that would extend the engagement zone. And they can continue this process until they're all the way out. At this point, once they're out of bounds, then they can't block anymore and they have to let the jammer go. Lastly, to close out the video, I do want to show a couple examples of what bridging looks like in gameplay. So I'll pause here. So the red wall will continue holding the white jammer in back. And I want you to watch the white blockers who will soon be forced to bridge. But you'll see that after playing some offense, this red blocker drops back while maintaining that 10 feet. If they drop back further, that would have been a pack destruction. But they drop back to force the white team to now have to bridge. So they dropped one bridge within 10 feet, and they're going to have to start dropping more skaters as they're pushed out of play. So that's everything we had for today, engagement zone and pack. Next time we will be going over 2.4 blocks and assists, so how to hit people legally and what parts of your body you can hit them with. We'll also be going over some of section 4, corresponding penalties for contact. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below, and thank you for watching.